What do you think are the biggest issues that humanity and the planet are facing at the moment?
I see climate change.
The biggest challenge we face is dealing with climate change. I think that is going to really make us vulnerable.
Climate change transcends across all sectors of society, whether it's disrupting economies, increasing hazards that are going to happen. Poverty will be compounded by climate change.
Poverty and food insecurity, as well as climate change.
What do you think are the biggest issues that humanity and the planet are facing at the moment?
Greed. I think a lot of things are driven by greed. More profits, more wealth, but only for a select few, which keeps the rest of the people marginalized still and indebted.
I think capital globalization, that's one of the root causes of climate change. That's one of the root causes of nations being against each other, or people on Earth being against each other. How climate change becomes such a threat is because of the greediness of corporates, transnational corporates, multinational corporations, the energy barons of this world. These are the ones who are contributing more to the kind of threats that are facing us.
I think some of the biggest issues that we are facing at the moment, it's probably the influence of corporates and how we deal with so much consumerism, how feverish we've become to all just want. We want. We don't consider what we truly need, we just want because the power of advertising, and we're looking at all these things accumulated. How do we deal with that? How do we dispose of that? Some of the stuff's not biodegradable.
If I look at the material damage that is done through consumer behavior in the United States, how many I got? About 300 million people, compared with the global environmental damage caused by India, which has over 1 billion people, it's incomparable. I do think population ultimately is a problem, but I think it's only a problem when the greater population becomes greater consumers.
One would think that's a no-brainer. You'd think that 8 billion people on the planet would be aware of the fact that we need to really drop everything else we're doing and start redesigning a future. But we are kept on a treadmill. The average Joe Soap on the street is so busy just trying to keep body and soul together, trying to put food on the table for his family. 80% of his waking time is spent enriching a corporation that he doesn't have enough time to think about this, let alone act on it.
There are so many issues to deal with. South Africa lately we've been dealing mostly with issues of race that are sort of just springing up on us, which are not really, I believe, not just springing up on us, but it's issues that we've sort of covered and swept under the carpet. But it's the same with every other issue.
I think there's a lot of symptoms that you might call the issues, but I think the cause really is that we've become separated from what really matters. It's almost like this big religion that everyone follows is making money, and to the detriment of everything else, and for the benefit of very few people. Actually, you can't separate yourselves from rich and poor because they're dramatically connected, whether you like it or not. And it's people who seem to be hitting up against that wall, whether they get ill or whether they see the destruction of our planet, or those are the people who are kind of waking up and going, we have to do something different.
The issue of environment, we always think that it's for the greenies, it's for whoever cares and not for us, and I think we headed, towards a very challenging time where things will seem like they are sort of springing up on us when we have just not been dealing with the root cause.
We have all the knowledge of what needs to be done. It's just not that impetus, that movement to make it shift. And it comes more from an economic side than anything else. Because I could tell you today, I have got all the solutions to solve our planet. And you might say, is there a business case to doing it? And I say, no, actually it will cost you a fortune. There's no business case whatsoever, but if you don't do it, you'll die. And then we're like, oh, I don't care, I'm just not going to do it because there's no business case, I'm not going to make money.
Economists have struggled to place a value on the environment. Ancient cultures had a value on the environment, it just wasn't in money terms. We've used a monetary system that only values productivity, which actually is part of the problem. It leads to exploitation because the environment doesn't have a value.
We've got one of the most beautiful constitutions that everyone raves about. You've got like a great constitution, but there is no justice and there's no peace. I have chosen in the past years Section 24 of the Bill of Rights, which is everyone has got a right to live in a healthy environment that is not harmful to their being, because that right links to all the other rights.
Our current economic system is not working. So if we look at how we measure progress, the assumption is that GDP is an indicator of progress, but that's not necessarily true. GDP does not really tell us how prosperous a nation is or how happy individuals are and so on. So we primarily need to question how we actually measure progress. A few months ago, the International Monetary Fund acknowledged for the first time that trickle-down economics does not work, you know.
Firstly, it's become very apparent, particularly since the last global financial crisis, but even way before that, when the 1980s kicked off with what is called neoliberalism, which is basically hypercapitalism, and that is set in motion exponentially widened inequality throughout the world, within countries and across the globe.
It starts with policies. It starts with companies knowing that if you're just chasing profit at the expense of society and the environment, it's not going to be sustainable. It's a short-term mentality. So we need to start building enterprises that are for profit as well as non-profit. So those hybrid social enterprises that understand that you can't keep on making profits invariably at the expense of society or the environment. It's going to stop somewhere, and it's not going to be a nice picture.
We forget what triggered the French Revolution, and I keep saying that over and over, that we forget the French Revolution was because the separation between the haves and the have-nots became that great that eventually the majority rises up and said, we've had enough of the minority. And I think sensible politics says you've got to start addressing that sooner than allowing it to trigger that again. We've seen it in many countries. We just refer back to the French Revolution, but it's happened in other countries. And the conversation needs to start at the political level about how do you actually have a more egalitarian approach to political systems.
This inequality has affected all countries. So in America, you have both this phenomenon of a right-wing neo-Nazi Donald Trump emerging out of the same dissatisfaction, and you have a democratic socialist Bernie Sanders, both exciting the imagination of people, all affected by the same issue. You have similar phenomena throughout Europe, Western Europe, and we have something similar happening in South Africa to some extent.
The truth is that capitalism doesn't actually serve the majority. It serves a very small minority of the world's population. So you have a world that's emerging now where less than 1% of the world's population really benefit from capitalism. The rest just work to serve it. And that's actually not a good outcome. Now, without sort of preaching socialism, there has to be something better than a system that relies on the minority of the world generating wealth that can provide employment for the rest of the world, because that's really just a subservient system. There's got to be a better way.
How can we address it? Okay, let's look for a single dynamic we can change. Right? Let's see what drove us to all of that. What drove us to all of that is the economical system in which we partake, in which we're forced to partake. Yeah. And that economical system is essentially an extractive, exploitative slave system. We extracting resources, which is finite, from a finite planet. We're using what is called human resources to do it in order to gain debt-based currency. And there's levels to the slavery. Some of us are field slaves and we're laboring out and toiling in the fields, and some of us are house slaves, and we might get to live in the big plantation house and eat from the table. But at the end of the day, we're all still serving that same master, chasing this currency. Let the value be redefined. Instead of the currency being the value, give people the freedom to define their value, because value is not necessarily only something tangible. It can be social good as well.
We need to change the narrative, and that's because we have been brought up in a world where, if you like, our minds have been focused on certain principles of what development, interpretation of what actually progress means, for example. But there's an opportunity for us to demonstrate that there's an alternative way of doing business. Let's move our investments from Wall Street to High Street. Because let's engage more with our communities, let's empower our communities. And hopefully by that, we can transition into a world that we all desire.